Thank you for tuning in to another episode with Mrs. Danielle DeVita. I am a relationship and femininity coach. I've been married for 13 years, and my goal is to help both men and women be in relationships that's best for them. And so today I'm going to talk about the difference between business contracts and marriages. You know, there's so many people that are saying, marriages are like business contracts, and that's the reason why a lot of men are afraid to get married because the alimony and there's no love in it. It's just business contracts, and or actually the men are explaining marriages as if it's a contract, and because it's this legal binding contract, a lot of men are saying, I don't want the government in this, and I don't want anything related to this legal title I have to have. No one can explain the love I have for you. I don't want the government in this and doing that. But it's funny how we don't mind making it a legal contract when it comes to buying a house, a car, and all the other things we want, getting that credit card. Everything requires the signing of things, and essentially those are some type of agreements or contracts. But now, I don't think that marriages are contracts. In fact, they are quite different. If you look at a contract, it's pretty much a beneficial and mutual agreement where both people are benefiting. You do this, you scratch your back, or you scratch my back, I scratch yours. We do this, we get money for it. It's some type of even exchange that you're getting out of it. You're getting this title, we're getting these dividends, and if there's a breach in this contract, I get liquidated damages, which is alimony, child support. Consequential damages would probably be the child support. Liquidating damages would be the alimony. At least how I look at it. So if you're talking about business contracts and then equating it to marriage, that's the side of it that you can try to take from it. The fact that you have to sign papers to make it legal, just like when you create a business, you file it with the Secretary of State, and here you would file, your marriage, do the marriage certificate with your particular county in which you are getting married. But I don't think marriages should be, nor were they intended to be, business contracts, because far long ago, business contracts were still in existence, but that's not what they were considered. They were considered covenants. This is your, vow, right? You say your vows. This is a covenant. So while contracts are an agreement, just like a covenant is, it's quite different. So taking it out of relationships, I'm going to explain a little bit more about covenants. I kind of explained about business contracts. You have a contract, one person makes a promise, and then this person agrees to it, and then now you have a binding contract. If there's a breach in the contract, because contracts can come to an end, then you have damages, right? Which is what happens when you do a breach. You have liquidating damage, consequential damages, and all of these things, but you go your separate ways. All of your assets, when you're doing the winding up of a business, if it comes to an end, then you liquidate your assets. There's a partition in case there's, assets like a property and things like that, and you go your merry way. The business is over with. But what happens if you look at your marriage, or you look at marriages as a contract? What are the children? Just assets? And you can't split the assets up. You can try, but they're always there. And a true business contract, when a business is done, there's nothing keeping you guys attached to it. Your assets are, there's a partition in that. You get a portion, and then you get a portion, and you go on your merry way. But if your children are considered an asset, what happens to that child? They're always in your life. And that's not, because this is not a business contract. The children that you create, the lives, the generations going forth, that's not a contract. You guys are still connected to each other somehow. What it is the covenant. And covenants, if you think about in property, if you have a home, if you look at the deed of your home, there are covenants. Covenants is the agreements of the developer that they set for everyone who is within this community. And covenants runs with the land. which means that no matter how many times this house is up for sale and new owners take over this house, even if it's up for rent, you're still binded by that same covenant. So you can get a divorce and get married all you want, but you're still, that covenant doesn't go anywhere. Just because you decided not to hold up your vows, because you decided not to be with this person, doesn't mean that that covenant disappears. People break vows, but that covenant still exists, which is why, in the Bible, God talks about, hey, he doesn't look at, getting married again as something that is okay, right? The Bible talks about, hey, you stay with this person, this is the person. And they don't look at remarriage like, oh, okay, you can remarry. But of course, God does forgiveness and things like that. But let's talk about where this comes from. In the Bible talks about marriages as covenants, right? He uses the term covenant often, not contracts, not agreements, but covenants. Both are a form of agreements, but there's a difference. As I mentioned to you, covenants runs with the land. So if it runs with the land, again, it doesn't matter who moves in or out, who builds a new home or not, how many landlords and people or ownership that there has, it runs with the land. Nothing changes with this covenant. Just because you decide not to agree to it doesn't mean it doesn't exist anymore. And this is more than some type of legal binding relationship. Think about children. It's more of a spiritual thing. It's a promise. It's a vow. Having children is a beautiful experience. But did you know that after you have that child, you have to sign a birth certificate? That makes it legal. You have to record, their weight, their height, how long they were, who was it that gave birth to them, like the mother, the father. You have to put all of this on a piece of paper so they can record it. So again, and the same thing with death. It still has to be recorded. None of those things are legal. Yes, the aftermath of it is legal for recording purposes and things like that. But it's a spiritual process. And that's what marriages are. It's a spiritual process. And so you don't look at your children as assets. You don't look at the things you have as assets or, things depreciating. You look at it as you are fulfilling your purpose. And part of that is creating the generations after you, starting with your child. And then your children's children, your children's children. It's a bloodline. And what people fail to realize is contracts can cease to exist. You can go on a different business adventure and have a contract with a new person and people can say, hey, well, that's what remarriage is. It's not what it's designed to be. And because people are treating it like a contract, they're just in and out of it, moving on to a different person, a different relationship, just like that. No strings attached, right? I'll just pay the damages. I'll pay the alimony or the child support as long as I'm not in this relationship anymore. But if you look at marriage as a covenant, as a spiritual binding agreement with this person, a promise, more so a pledge, if you look at it that way, then you won't see it as a contract. There's legal ramifications to it. But this agreement is more like a promise, a pledge to fulfill the purpose that God has given you, starting with the submitting to one another. You don't submit to one another in a contract. You submit unto one another in a covenant. And then you create something greater than yourself. You create children, and then they will then create children as well. And you instill values, instill love. You don't do those in contracts. You don't have to be mindful of all of these efforts and communication being applied. There's more of a directness to it, and you move on as long as it works. But there has to be a selflessness in a marriage. There can't be greed. You can't be counting all the wrong and right, because when you think about a contract, there are some type of articles from corporation. If you do this, you can be removed. If you do this, then this, we can void the contract. If you do this, then this can happen. No. If you truly are trying to create this bond with this person, it's not going to be like that. And so if you stop looking at marriage as some type of business contract, but looking at it as a covenant, your whole mindset about marriage will change. How you even search for your wife, how you even be available for your husband will be different, because a covenant will be treated differently than a contract. Contracts can be breached. Contracts can be voided. And in some cases, contracts are unilateral. When you think about people who are in relationships where they're forced to marry, unilateral contracts. Bilateral contracts where two people coming together in that agreement. But a lot of people are forced to, marry in different countries. Those are unilateral contracts. But we are not talking about people are just forcing to be with each other for business purposes or because it makes sense or because there's this mutual benefit. But we're talking about a covenant, a promise, a vow to uphold the laws that God had for us. And this is where that comes from. This is where marriage comes from. Marriage didn't start in the courtroom and with those who were professors of the law, as they called it in the Bible. This was a covenant between man and woman that God created for them to fulfill the purpose that God had for them. That's what this was. Marriage came from the Bible, but we're giving so much credit to the government that they created this? No, they defiled it by making it look like it's a legal contract and it's to deter people from doing it. But this was something that was set long before with God. So the question is, what do you want? Do you want a contract or a covenant? And if you look at it differently, you'll see relationships differently. So if you like this video, go ahead and like, subscribe. Thank you for watching my content. Take care.